Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murder of 17-year-old Michele Avila. In 1985, 17-year-old Michele Avila lived in Arleta, California, which is a neighborhood in Los Angeles County. And one Wednesday afternoon in October of 1985, Michele told her mother that she was going to be leaving the house to hang out with a girlfriend of hers named Laura. She kissed her mother and she left. But then hours later, Laura actually called Michelle's home. And when her mother picked up the phone and realized it was Laura asking to speak to Michele, she was confused because she's like, hello, you guys just left together a few hours ago. And this is when Laura tells her that they had been together and that she had dropped Michele off at a park with a couple of boys that Michele knew while she went to get gas. And when she came back, the boys were gone and Michele was gone. 17-year-old Michele's body would be found a few days later, face down in a creek. And though this case seemed like it would be a pretty simple one to solve, I mean, she's a 17-year-old girl, there aren't a lot of people she could have come in contact with, this case went unsolved for years. And when they finally did get justice for Michele, and when it was revealed who did this to her, it shocked her family and it shocked the community at large. Because it was the people closest to Michele, the people that she trusted the most that were responsible for her murder, and they have been hiding in plain sight. But before we get into the entire story, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into all the details of this case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Aura. Now, have you ever wondered why you get all of these spam emails from companies that you've never heard of, or why you get calls and texts from numbers that just seem a little bit off? Well, this is because there are these things out there called data brokers, and data brokers are making billions, yes, billions with a B, of dollars by selling your information to people you don't want to have it, like marketers and scammers. Now, data brokers, are legally required to remove your information if you ask them to, but they make it the process of removing your information super confusing on purpose, and that's one of the ways in which Aura comes in. They automatically remove your info from these sites. I'm like, look at how many different data brokers can have your information. Like, okay, I don't even know what email industries is, but somehow they have my information when I didn't give them permission to. But Aura helps to remove it, and they help to keep it off. They do all the hard work so that you do not have to. And that's not all they do. Aura is all-in-one digital security. You can get alerts if your personal info is found on the dark web. You can get time fraud alerts for credit and banking. You can get a secure VPN, the antivirus, password manager, and more. And of course, if anything does happen, Aura has US fraud experts ready to help 24/7. So you get all the online protection you could ever want or ever need in one place. And that is why I recommend Aura. I don't want to leave myself vulnerable, and I have to imagine that you don't want to do that either. So if all that sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to click the link in my description box. It's aura.com/BRATTERSTEIN to get a 14-day free trial and see whether your personal data has been exposed. And if it has, let Aura help you put a stop to it today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Aura for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Aura that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. Now, let's go ahead and get into the case. You may recognize this case because of a couple of reasons. One, my previous coverage. I covered this case forever ago. It's one of the first cases I covered on my channel back when I still did makeup on the channel, and I just feel like I could do better with a retelling. I feel like there's more information that could be shared, and I feel like I've been doing this from time to time, redoing an old case just to do it better, give it justice. Like, I give the case the justice it deserves, because when I first started, you get better with time. Practice makes... not perfect, because I'm not perfect, but it definitely makes things better and it helps you improve. So that's the one reason. One, you might have seen my previous video. But two, this case was actually what inspired a Lifetime movie. Was it a Lifetime movie or was it just a movie? It was made, I believe, in 1992, and it was called A Killer Among Friends with the chick from Saved by the Bell. I haven't seen it in years, though, but from what I see online, the general consensus is that it is pretty accurate to the actual crime, but there are, of course, differences. Hollywood do be taking some creative liberties from time to time. So today, I'm going to tell you the entire real story of the murder of Michele Avila. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once we have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. Who do you believe was the person who was actually responsible for the physical murder of Michele Avila? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below because I'm very curious to hear what you have to say. And now with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murder of 17-year-old Michele Avila. Michele Avila, who went by the nickname Missy, was born on February 8th, 1968 in Los Angeles, California. She was the only daughter of her mother, Irene, and her father, Ernie, her mother's dream baby after having two energetic boys and then eventually having a third energetic boy. And Missy had come into the world in a bit of a stressful way. Medically, it was complicated, but the girls were here. Mama and Missy were here, and Mama and Missy were safe. Growing up, Missy was the apple of her brother's eye. They were obsessed with her. They loved playing with her. And as they grew up together, they became incredibly close. They were always doing things together. They were outside playing with the trucks, in the mud, and being just like rambunctious little kids. Missy was a tiny little thing. She was a tiny little baby that the doctors had to tell Irene, you need to try to do what you could and to feed her more because she was so tiny. But as she got bigger, or older rather, it turned out that that's just kind of how Missy was. She was a tiny little baby who turned into a petite and beautiful young woman. Missy lived with her mother and her three brothers in Arleta, California, which is in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. And she did have a father. As I said, she had a father named Ernie, but I know that her father and mother got a divorce shortly before Missy was murdered. And I don't know how involved he was in her life after that, because simply because there are hardly any interview quotes from him. There isn't much from him. You see a ton from Irene, but he has stayed mostly silent. And that's not to say that he for sure wasn't involved. He might just be a private person, but I'm not 100% sure on that. The point is, it seems that the parental role went strictly to Irene at this point, and Irene and Missy were super close. They truly seemed to have a special bond. This was her only daughter, and Missy was so much like she had been when she was younger. So the two of them just clicked. They could talk about anything. Missy was one of those kids who could tell her mother anything, even if it be telling her about her first sexual experience or the first time that she smoked. And not all kids feel comfortable telling their parents those types of things. Growing up, Missy was known to be a very well-liked girl, even from a young age. She was popular, she was fun to be around, and she was very pretty, both inside and in personality. She just had something that pulled people in. Boys wanted to be with her because of her personality, her charisma, her long dark hair, and her beautiful green eyes, and girls wanted to be her. She was bright and positive and happy and smart, even being in classes for gifted children in elementary school, and she wanted to grow up to be a physical therapist. She loved nature and poetry and had a loving spirit and a carefree heart, and she was the type of girl who just gave people the benefit of the doubt, Even if somebody was rude to her, even if somebody was mean to her, she tried not to take it personally, and she just assumed that whoever was doing this had something going on in their lives behind the scenes. And Missy's brothers said that one of the faults that she had is she was just too trusting. And that's incredibly tragic considering it was the people that she trusted the most who went on to take her life. So let's get into that. Although Missy was popular and had tons of friends, she had one main best friend, her ride or die, like most little girls too. And this was a girl named Karen Severson. Karen and Missy had known each other for years. Reportedly, they met when they were just 8 years old when Karen's family moved into the neighborhood. I think they actually lived in the same block as Missy and her family. And from the time that they met, they were best buds and completely inseparable. They were each other's most important person, right? They were like sisters more than just friends because they were together so much. They grew up together, right? They started as kids together and they went to preteens together. They went to teenagers together. They liked all the same things. They grew up in the same, freaking neighborhood. And Karen ended up being like Irene's second daughter. They were so incredibly intertwined in each other and just loved each other so much until about the age of 14. Now, there are a number of reasons why these girls had a natural growing apart process at the age of 14. You're 14. you change a lot at that time, but also something pretty drastic happened around that time. And that is that Karen actually got pregnant. So Karen had this boyfriend, a boyfriend who Missy was kind of worried about just because the relationship moved so fast. And she was like, this seems like a little bit much, but Karen was super, super invested in it and did end up becoming pregnant. She was with baby, right? So she gets pregnant. And because of that, in the 9th grade, she had to drop out of school because she had a new little baby to take care of, obviously. Now, because of this, because they were on 2 totally different life paths at this point, and they just weren't seeing each other as much every day, they had a totally normal growing apart process. Like, I can't even tell you how many people that I knew and considered myself to be friends with prior to having my baby that I haven't talked to in years at this point, and that just kind of happens. And we were like grown-ass adults. I can't even imagine how it would be with like teenagers and how fickle things like that can be. After Karen and Missy weren't in the same school together anymore and they weren't seeing each other as often, though in the beginning Missy would try to go and see Karen at her house as much as she possibly could, things were just different. They had, one, totally different priorities at this point. Like, I can't even imagine, like, things, I have changed fundamentally as a person since having a child. And I imagine that had to have happened to Karen too. So they just have totally different things that they're dealing with. They're not seeing each other as much. And so they just sort of grew apart. I feel like most people have had a friend that's just happened with. Even if you didn't have a baby, you just were really close, and then just time and life sent you in different directions. Now, even though this is totally normal, it was really difficult for Karen, which is also totally normal to have trouble with the fact that you're losing one of your best friends, or it feels like you're losing the grip you had on your best friend after having such a life-changing experience. I can totally sympathize with that. But when it came to Karen, in addition to that, which is normal, she also seemed to be like kind of obsessed with Missy. At least that's how it's reported. Everybody who knew them at the time said that Karen was the type of friend who Missy had to be her, or she had to be Missy's only person. She could not handle Missy having other people in her life. So them growing apart and her seeing Missy going out and doing things and being separate of her was incredibly challenging for her. Missy was her best friend and only her best friend. And throughout the years before they, came to have this little riff around the age of 14, she had been like Missy's only person. She had even taken on the role of sort of like Missy's protector since Missy was such a petite little thing. And Karen was sort of the opposite of that. Like, that was her person. And Missy's mother, Irene, set up this, and I quote, "If another girl would want to be Missy's friend, Karen would make sure that girl did not get close to her. She was very possessive of my daughter." The only other person that Karen seemed to be even able to tolerate Missy being friends with was another girl that was their mutual friend, and this was Laura Doyle. So I guess Laura had known Missy and Karen since they were kids as well, though they hadn't stayed as close as Karen and Missy did. She'd kind of, grown apart for a little bit, and then they reconnected when they were teenagers. And eventually they started seeing each other all the time. They started going to the same school, and they ended up being incredibly intertwined in each other's lives. They would hang out with all 3 of them together. When Karen and Missy were talking less, Missy would hang out more with Laura and vice versa. And with time, Laura became sort of like a fixture in Missy's life and even in Missy's household, because I guess Laura didn't have like the best home life. So she often spent a lot of time with Missy and with Missy's family, and she started to call Irene mom. Both Laura and Karen called Irene mom. There was a point where the 3 of them were said to always have been together and be incredibly close, despite being really, really different girls. All of them were very different from each other. Like, okay, Missy, she was popular, she was friendly, she was fun, she was charismatic. And Karen, it sounds harsh, but people said that she was loud and obnoxious and liked to start trouble with people. And then Laura, totally different. Laura was said to have a, quote, explosive personality and was the type of girl to carve boys' initials into her skin with the sharp end of a paperclip. So, a real ragtag team over here, but they were close and they were friends until they weren't? Question mark? Let's get into that. So they had their falling out, right? Karen and Missy. But after Karen went on to have her baby and a little bit of time had gone by, she re-enrolled in school. But this time she was going to a continuation school, which if you don't know what that is, and it sounds like intense, I understand. But fun fact, I actually graduated from a continuation school. And basically what it is a school for those of you who are having trouble getting the grades you need or the credits you need in order to graduate, to continue with your education and graduate. So that's where Karen was going, and Missy ends up getting transferred over to that school as well. By this time, her personality was changing a little bit. She was getting more rebellious, getting into a little bit more trouble. She was being a teenager, right? She had a new group of friends who were a little bit not the ones you'd want your kid to be friends with, right? They're a little bit rough around the edges. She starts drinking and skipping school and things like that. So she gets switched over to the continuation school as well. So Missy's there. Karen's there. And I don't know if Laura was also at this school. I couldn't see it confirmed, but she was definitely, still friends with both of the girls. So Missy and Karen around this time had, squashed their beef, buried their hatchet, if you will. And whatever it was, things seemed to be okay. And they were both hanging out with Laura. And so it seemed like everything was fine and the gang was back together. Or so Missy thought. Because they were definitely dealing with some lingering resentment towards Missy. And Karen said of her relationship with Missy at this time, and I quote, "Even when I was back at school, I saw less of Missy. It really hurt. I felt like she dropped me. I'd always been there for her loyal protector. So I turned on Missy. I found another girl, Laura Doyle, who didn't like Missy either. Once I would have defended her, but now I joined in the cruelty." So, though it seemed like Missy thought that everything between her and her friends were cool, Karen and Laura hadn't quite wiped the slate clean. Now, let me tell you why. Karen and Laura were jealous as fuck of Missy. Okay, they were super jealous of her. I mentioned in the beginning, she was beautiful. She was charismatic. Missy, beautiful, charismatic. Girls wanted to be her and boys wanted to have her. Okay. And it was the boys wanting to have her part that became a huge issue for Karen and Laura. And specifically, there were two guys that this was an issue with. This was Randy and this was Vic. So let's start with Randy. Randy was an ex-boyfriend of Michelle's, but not like a serious one. The relationship was very short-lived. They were only together maybe a month before Michelle ended it. They just weren't a good match for each other, which, cool, that seems fine. Except there was a little bit of drama there because once Randy breaks up with Michelle, Michelle, I'm going to go back and forth calling her both because that's what my brain's doing today. Once they broke up, Randy started dating Karen. And not only did he start dating Karen, but he immediately moved in with Karen. And I was like, first off, aren't these children? Why are they living together? A. And B, not cool, man. Ex-boyfriends are off limits to friends. That's just the rules of feminism. So the two of them getting together didn't go over especially well, as I'm sure you can imagine. But not for the reasons you may think, because even though this was not a very cool thing for Karen to do to her best friend by dating her best friend's ex, right? By dating Missy's ex-boyfriend, it wasn't Missy who was making this a rough situation for everybody involved. It was actually Karen. Missy's the one who dumped Randy, right? And because of this, because of the fact that Karen believed that because Missy dumped Randy, Randy still had feelings for Missy, which, spoiler alert, he did. And truthfully told, even if that wasn't the case, even if Randy had dumped Missy, I think she still would have probably acted this way. I don't know for sure. I didn't know her, but I get the vibe she would have. But because of that, she was incredibly jealous of Missy when it came to Randy specifically. And even though Missy did everything she could to let Karen know, hey, I don't want him. That's why I let him go. He's all yours. Karen was still so jealous that she wouldn't let Missy and Randy be together, in the same room. She had a huge issue with that. And, the truth is, like I said, Randy wasn't completely over Missy. He did still have feelings for her. So Karen was justified in feeling like something was there. It just wasn't coming from Missy. It was Randy. And he would do things that would be inappropriate. It would piss Karen off. And there was one instance where Missy and Randy were in the same room and Karen was there, but she had left the room and Randy started flirting with Missy and Missy turned him down. She was like, hello, one, not interested. Two, you're dating my friend. And Missy even went to Karen and was like, listen, this is what he did. He's not a good boyfriend. You should move on and get somebody else. But Karen was not having it. Karen thought that Missy wanted Randy. She thought that Missy was telling her that she should break up with Randy just so Missy could have him back when Missy didn't want him. And it just was a point of contention. And it got so bad that Karen and Randy did end up breaking up over this. They did, but they got back together. They broke up and got back together several times. And the last time they got back together is actually because Karen got pregnant again, this time with Randy's baby. And it just seemed like the whole relationship between them was very, very drama-filled and toxic. And at the center of it was Missy, even though she wasn't interested in Randy. And all of this came to a head, actually, when Karen and Missy got into a physical fight. They were at a local park. Laura was there as well, and Karen and Missy started fighting, and Karen, being much larger, ended up getting the upper hand, got Missy knocked to the floor, and just started pummeling her, and then even took like a broken beer bottle and threatened her with it, like she was going to stick her. The girls made up after this fight, but it was just clear that this was a very toxic situation, and Karen was not like shy about letting people know that she had an issue with Missy for this. Okay, get this. Karen even went to Missy's house once when she wasn't there and hung out just with her mom, which that part's not weird to me. My best friend would hang out with my mom all the time when I wasn't around after I moved to LA. And I thought that was very sweet. But she's hanging out with Irene, Missy's mom, and she's talking mad shit about Missy to her own mother. And Irene said of this conversation with Karen, quote, "She said my daughter took everybody's boyfriend away and that she was a big flirt. I just told her, if you're not going to talk right, just get out." So, overall, the Randy thing was a rough situation. Now, let's talk about Vic. So, Vic was another ex-boyfriend of Missy's who she had been with and had ended the relationship with because she no longer wanted to pursue him. After they broke up, he got into a relationship with Laura. Again, feminism. Anyways, Laura and him dated. It didn't work out. According to him, Laura was far too jealous for him. He couldn't handle being in a relationship with her because she was too much when it came to that, which checks. She was said to be incredibly jealous when it came to him talking to any other girl, and was particularly jealous if he was to talk to Missy because Missy was his ex-girlfriend. And truth is, it seemed like there may have been something going on with Missy and Vic after they had broken up, but it definitely stopped once he got into a relationship with Laura. So Laura and Vic date, they break up, and she has a really hard time accepting that it's over and had gotten incredibly bitter. And she seemed to believe that it was Missy's fault that the two had broken up in the first place, and she would only get like confirmation of this a few weeks before Missy was murdered. And this is because Missy and Vic were still friends. So there was an evening where Missy was over at Vic's house. They were sitting outside, they were talking, and Vic, who still had feelings for Missy, leaned over and kissed her on the cheek. Now, Laura had been watching the two of them. They did not know that, but she was outside being a creep and watching them. So when she saw the kiss happen, she lost her shit. She ran up, she started screaming, she started trying to fight Missy, she started trying to fight Vic. And as he pulled her away and tried to tell her that she needed to leave, she told him, quote, "I'm gonna kill that bitch." Which kids say that, and that would be totally not an appropriate thing to say, but I think a normal thing to say based on, the things that I've heard teenagers say. But, considering where this case goes, it's anything but. All of this is to say that Karen and Laura had beef with Missy, and truth be told, the beef had happened prior to Randy and Vic. Like, that just seemed to exacerbate an already existing issue, because the girls had always been jealous of Missy and had issues with the attention that she would get from boys and from people in general, and they were very catty about it. For example, they went to school together, right? I mentioned that. Well, while they were in school together, all of these rumors started swarming around about Missy that were started by Karen. And these rumors were basically that Missy was messing around with boys who had girlfriends. And because of these rumors, a lot of girls did not like Missy, and it got to the point that several of them tried to fight her. She got in one fight with a particularly angry girl named Sonia, who believed that Missy was messing with her boyfriend. And clearly Sonia won, because when Missy came home from school, or from outside of school, when Missy came home, she was outside, and she came in, and her mom saw the condition she was in. Her mother contacted the police. Charges were pressed, and Missy was actually supposed to go to court and testify against Sonia, but wasn't able to because she was murdered before she could. So the girls had some tension. They had been super close. They had grown apart. They had gotten close again. They had fought and stopped being friends. But in October of 1985, Missy was under the impression that everything between the three of them was fine. They were friends again. Everybody had apologized, and it was water under the bridge. And that is why on October 2nd, 1985, Missy came to her mother, Irene, and let her know that she was going to be going to hang out with her friend, Laura. Irene did say, "Oh, are you guys talking again? I thought that you guys weren't cool." And she told her mom, "No, everything is fine. We are good. She's going to pick me up, and we're going to go hang out at a nearby park." Missy was super stoked to be able to be hanging out with her closest friends again. She was so excited about the idea of hanging out with them that she actually turned down plans with this new boyfriend she had, a guy that she was pretty excited about. He wanted to spend time with her, but she was like, friends come first. If you want to be my lover, you gotta get with my friends. And so she told him, like, no, we're not gonna hang out. Gave him a kiss when he dropped her off at home after school, and told him that she would call him later. But she never did. So at 3:30 p.m. that day, Laura showed up to pick up Missy. The two were happy, and the two were smiling and laughing as they drove off together, with Missy's mother, Irene, being under the impression that her child would be calling her at about 8 p.m. that evening. And this would be the last time she would ever see her daughter alive. So it was about 6 p.m. that evening when Irene would get her first indication that something may be wrong with her daughter. Okay, her phone rings, and in her head, she's like, oh, it's a little early for Missy to be calling me, but she picks it up and she hears on the other end of the line, it's actually Laura, and Laura is asking to speak to Missy. And she's like, what are you talking about? She left with you a couple hours ago saying that she was going to be with you for the rest of the day. And this is when Laura gives her a strange story. Laura tells Irene that she was supposed to be with Missy for the entire day, and that when they were driving, Missy really wanted to go straight to the park, but Laura needed to stop and get gas. So she had driven Missy to the park and dropped her off to leave her there when she went to get this gas. Now, why would Michele have been in such a hurry to get to the park that she couldn't even wait for Laura to get gas? Well, according to Laura, when she took Michele to the park, there were a couple of guys there with a blue Camaro waiting for her. So Michele had a boy she was planning to meet up with. So Laura drops her off with these boys, leaves to go get her gas, and when she comes back, Missy is gone and the dudes in the blue Camaro are gone. So Laura was saying that she figured that Missy had hung out with these boys, and by this time she would be home. But she wasn't. So Laura just told Irene to have Missy give her a call when she got home, and the two hung up. But this phone call left Irene feeling very stressed out because, like, where was her kid? Hours went by and Missy never came home. So all night, Irene stayed up with a mixture of stress and anger bubbling inside of her. Anger because if Missy really was just out with friends and had not had the common courtesy to call, that's messed up. But stress because she wasn't totally convinced that Missy was not coming home by choice. Irene says she remembers sitting in her home at about 2 a.m. and thinking to herself, like, ooh, this girl is really going to get it. But at the same time, deep down, she was worried because she really thought that something terrible had happened. And she said specifically of this night, and I quote, I stayed up all night with that front door open to see if my daughter was coming home, and she never did. The next morning, when Missy still hadn't returned, Irene sat down with Missy's older brother and tried to talk to him about what was going on, and he did try to calm her nerves. He told her not to worry. He was sure that Missy would be home any minute, would have an explanation as to where she had been. But as hours that day creeped on and she still hadn't heard anything from her daughter, she started reaching out to all of Missy's friends, calling them, and nobody had heard from her, and nobody knew who these dudes she had been with were. So that day, when Missy still hadn't gotten home by 3 p.m., Irene finally contacted the police department to report her daughter missing. Now, as we often see, the officer who was taking the report about Missy being missing did try to minimize the situation. He said, like, she hasn't been gone very long. It's very possible she's just out with a friend. She's just sleeping somewhere and she hasn't gotten to you. She hasn't been able to, and you'll hear from her soon. But Irene was just like, listen, you do not understand. This is unusual. I feel it in my gut. And she made sure that that report got made. The police started searching for Missy around Arleta and the surrounding areas. And meanwhile, Irene, her friends, and family members also conducted their own search, which included knocking on doors and asking, acquaintances and friends for information. But despite their best efforts, no one had heard from or about Missy. No one knew where she was. Days went by, dude. I can't even imagine days going by with you having no idea what happened to your child or where your child is. I can only imagine the stress, the pain, the wanting to hope for the best, that everything is fine, but then knowing deep down in your heart that probably everything isn't fine, and then finding out for certain that everything was not fine, because any sort of hope that Missy's family was able to hold on to, that she was out there, that there was some sort of explanation for all this craziness, was destroyed when on October 4th, 1985, two hikers discovered Missy's body. So basically, there were these two men who were out hiking in Los Angeles like they oftentimes did. And around midday while they were out hiking, great, they ended up at the woods, or in the woods rather, at Colby Canyon, which was in Angeles National Forest, which was about 45 minutes from Missy's house. And about 100 yards east of the Colby Bridge, there was a small clearing with large rocks surrounded by, or rather, it was a creek surrounded by large rocks. So they got there and they found that the place looked pretty rough. It was once a natural and serene place, but it had since been discovered by the youths, and it had clearly been used as a party spot. There were like beer bottles and cigarette butts and everything littered all over the ground. So they get there, they see that, and they start to continue on. They hiked for a short while more when all of a sudden they came to a large log that was in this creek, and they could tell that something was pinned under it. And at first they thought that it was just some clothing that like somebody had thrown in the creek and somehow gotten stuck under this log. But as they looked closer, they realized that what they were seeing was the body of a teenage girl. She was laying on her stomach, and I don't know why this note just destroys me, but her hair was like floating in the water and her arms were pinned in an unusual way. So these men, they freak out. Obviously, this is not what they were intending to see on their nature hike that day. They contact the police, and the police show up and start processing this scene. And once they do, it's clear to them that Missy had gone through a bit of a struggle before she was killed. She had cuts and scratches to her face. She had marks on her arms that looked like she had been like physically restrained. And then her long dark hair that she loved so much had been cut off and ripped out in chunks and was on the rocks nearby. And when her autopsy was performed, they found that she had marks and bruises all over her upper body that were from a beating she likely received before she was killed. And they determined that she was murdered by drowning because she had been held underwater by a 4-foot log that was 100 pounds. It was literally heavier than she was, and it had been placed on her back while she was face down in the water to drown her. Police quickly started to investigate Missy's murder, and initially the only thing that they really had to go on was the fact that her friends had said, or Laura had said rather, that she was last seen with a couple of boys and a blue Camaro. And the evidence at her murder scene sort of seemed to back up the story a little bit because they looked around and they were like, oh, there's beer cans, there's beer bottles, there's cigarette butts everywhere. Clearly, people went out here to party. Maybe these boys came out here to party. The police looked into all the blue Camaros that were registered to people in the area. And as I'm sure you can imagine, there were quite a few people, but they were tracking down every single one of them. They were going and speaking to the owners and getting their alibis. And this whole process was taking quite a lot of time, and unfortunately was leading to a dead end. So while police were doing their own investigation, Irene couldn't very well just sit and wait. She didn't have that in her. So she actually went out and did her own investigation into her daughter's murder. She wanted to try to find that blue Camaro. So she would just go out and drive around and look for blue Camaros, hoping that she would come upon the one that Missy was last seen with. She would drive around, often with Karen and Laura by her side, and actually pull people over while they were driving or approach them while they were parked and start asking them questions about her daughter's murder. It's just wild to me that Karen and Laura were so involved in this search. They made Irene think that they just wanted to be there for her as emotional support and that they had as much interest in like tracking down Missy's killer, but really they just wanted to be involved in the investigation. But still, Karen would sit there and comfort Irene and tell her, like, I am by your side. I will be there for you. And the moment we catch this animal, the animal that killed Missy, I'm going to be right beside you in court. And Irene just trusted Karen so much. It was her daughter's best friend. She'd been around her entire life. Karen, to Irene, was family. She literally had no idea that this girl had anything to do with her daughter's murder. These girls, particularly Karen, involved themselves with Missy's family and the investigation to a shocking degree. The two girls went to Missy's funeral. Laura sent Irene a sympathy card with $20 inside of it, telling her how sorry she was for what happened to her daughter and reminding her that she wasn't just Missy's mother, but she was her mother too. And Karen and her daughter, because remember, she was a mom. Karen was a mom. Karen and her young daughter basically moved into Irene's house, moved in with her, and got to sit there and have a front row seat to just how absolutely devastated and tormented with grief she was at not having her daughter and also not having answers. She would see what this entire family was going through, and it's like it didn't even faze her. And Missy's brother thought that Karen, who was always jealous of Missy, like that's one thing. I haven't even really gotten into the extent of that. But Missy's brother said that Karen was so jealous of Missy because they were just like the complete opposites. Missy was everything she wanted to be. Missy was smaller and prettier and had friends and would get attention from boys and could just be herself, where Karen was taller and thicker and people made fun of her. And she always had to prove something. In addition to that, Karen was known to be jealous of Missy's life as a whole. Missy was from a perceived whole and loving family, though her parents were divorced, and Karen was adopted. And though she was literally chosen by her parents to have and to hold and to love, she felt rejected by her birth parents who seemingly didn't want her. And all of that is to say, I got off on such a thing. Missy's brother said that he thinks that Karen did this because she was jealous of Missy and wanted to take her place. And I mean, during the time that she stayed with the house, some of Missy's stuff went missing too, like jewelry of Missy's and photos of her and photos of the two of them together. It just seemed to the family like she was obsessed. She would eat dinner with them and celebrate holidays with them and grieve with them. And later, when she was finally arrested and she was asked why she did these things, she said she just wanted to be close by so she could keep an eye on the investigation. After Karen's eventual release, yeah, we will get there, she went on to do a number of interviews. You can find them on YouTube. If you search her, you will find them. And her most popular one was one with Dr. Phil, where she was specifically asked, why she consoled Missy's mother, Irene, so much, knowing that she had killed her child. And Karen said of this, and I quote, "I felt like I had an obligation to Missy's family after what I did. I also wanted to know how the police investigation was going. I wanted to know who the suspects were and what evidence they'd found." And, that statement right there to me makes it pretty obvious that she was clearly more interested in self-preservation than any obligation she felt to Missy or her family. But at the time, Missy's family would never have known this because she seemed to be just as distraught as they were. She became seemingly obsessed with the case. She went and visited Missy's grave several times a week and even took a Christmas tree to her grave. Which Christmas, man, Christmas was such a hard time for Irene specifically. One, she didn't have her daughter to celebrate Christmas with. And two, she'd be out in the world, at the mall shopping because of the consumerism of it all. And she would see a girl from behind who she just thought was her daughter. And for a moment, her heart would just drop and then it would all come back to reality. And she'd realize it couldn't be because she's gone. She said it all just felt like a bad dream. And it was a bad dream that was caused by Karen. It was her fault that Missy's family was going through this. And it seemed like she might have been going through it a little bit herself because she started to tell Irene, Missy's mother, that she was seeing Missy's ghost. Okay? She said that she would see an apparition at the end of the bed. And one time she was sitting out in the living room with Irene when all of a sudden she screamed and said that Missy was sitting on the couch. And at one point, she said she had been out at Missy's grave. And when she went to leave, the car she was driving wouldn't start. So she screamed outside, "Missy, let me go." And she told Irene that she believed Missy was stopping her from leaving the cemetery. And later, Irene said, "Hey, I don't know, maybe Missy was haunting her. I wouldn't put it past her. And honestly, I hope," this is what she said, "I hope that Missy haunts these girls for the rest of their lives for what they did." And she did seem to be haunted. They both did. Laura, after this, became a shell of herself. She didn't insert herself with Missy's family quite the same way that Karen did. She came over a few times and she did talk about wanting to take her life because she was the last person to see Missy alive, but she mostly stayed to herself. And then Karen, we have her talking about seeing her ghost, and she also started drinking excessively. And when she was asked why, she would just say that she was depressed and upset and missed her friend. And I hope that it was the guilt that was driving her to feel this way. But honestly, I'm not super convinced after seeing how she talks after getting out. I'm going to be honest. I'm just not convinced that she feels bad. This girl honestly just had such audacity, dude. I cannot believe she moved into Missy's house and got close to her mother, consoled her mother, let her mother get close to her child in the absence of Missy. The whole thing disgusts me and pisses me off. She would even go to the place where Missy's body was found, a place that prior to her murder, the girls would go when they just wanted to hang out. and clear their heads. And she even, while staying at Irene's house, had like a freaking murder board up on the wall with like the red string and all the articles about Missy's murder and everything. And to her family, it just seemed like she was super distraught over losing her friend. But we know that wasn't the case. She also tried to like influence those around her and Missy's family and try to convince them that other people were responsible for the murder. Okay, like she would literally give them other suspects to focus their energy on and accuse innocent people of being murderers. And one of the people that she convinced people was a murderer was Randy. Randy, her on again, off again boyfriend, the guy who got her pregnante. Okay, so what had happened here was one day Karen was with a group of friends up at the area where Missy's body had been found, where she had been killed. And they were looking at a tree that was near that creek. Okay, and on this tree, there were some carvings. There was one carving that said like Randy plus Karen. There was another carving that said Missy plus Karen forever. And somebody had tried to cut out, like gash out, like with a knife, Missy's name and Randy's name. And Karen took this to be anecdotal evidence that Randy had killed Missy because he wasn't over her and couldn't deal with the fact that she didn't love him. Which would be a fucking leap. But it's even more of like a what the hell when you know that she's one of the ones who did it. But this led to a group of guys jumping him and beating the ever-loving shit out of him. And reportedly, according to a book, another time they literally were going to like assassinate him. And who led this boy, Randy, to the ambush where he got the shit beat out of him? And who was the one who was like orchestrating them to try to kill him? That would be Karen, the woman who he dated, the woman who cared about him so much, that she like killed her friend over jealousy. And the one who had gotten pregnant with his baby and had aborted it because she didn't want to be a mother to his child. She just seemed to be so unhinged. First with blaming Randy for doing this, knowing he didn't do it, and then telling her mother, her friends, anyone who would listen, she would give them other names of other people who may be responsible, knowing full well that she's the one who did it. She did everything in her power to try to keep the eyes off of her. And what she didn't know is that she didn't even need to do this because police never suspected her. Because if you think about it, they didn't even know she had been with Missy because Laura's the one who picked her up and Laura's the one who said she went off with these dudes in the Camaro. So police literally didn't suspect her at all. They were following up this blue Camaro lead. They followed up other leads. And eventually they followed them all till they led to dead ends and the case went cold for 2 years. For those 2 years, the only story that police knew was the one that Laura had told them about Missy being left at the park with some boys in a blue Camaro. Eventually, though, I think it was after the 2 years, sometime before they were caught, she changed this story. She told the police and Irene that this was not true. There was no park. Well, there was a park, but she didn't leave Missy at it. But there were no boys, and there was no blue Camaro. Now, why would Laura lie about something like that? She says that she lied about it because what really happened is she had taken Missy to a church so that the two could get drugs. She, I believe it was cocaine, was going there to get drugs for them to do up at the park or the forest. Were they going to go to the forest anyway? No, she didn't say that. She was going to get drugs for them to do. So she says she left Missy at a church with a drug dealer and then left, and then Missy was just gone. And I cannot even imagine what police are thinking when they hear this story switch after wasting so much time chasing a lead that did not exist. Now, this new information, this new lead, this new drug dealer situation didn't bring up any new leads. It immediately went to a dead end and it was so frustrating. This whole case was so frustrating to investigators. They said that they had talked to everybody who even breathed in Missy's direction and they were questioning people to the point that they were being badgered to the brink of hostility with the police questioning them. But still, they were getting no useful information. And I find that to be strange, actually. I find it kind of weird that they never suspected Karen because you would think if they had talked to everyone who breathed in Missy's direction, they would learn that Karen and Laura had some beef with her because, like, they were pretty open about it. But still, they were never on the radar. And they followed this new lead with the drug dealer guy. Went nowhere, and the case went cold for another year. The only thing that really came out of this new confession by Laura is that police started to suspect that she may have known more than she was saying, but they had no idea what she was hiding, and they wouldn't. Well, they would eventually. They would find out 3 years after Missy was murdered when they got their first real big break. So it was July of 1988, which, real quick, does anyone else feel like 1988 should have just been like 20 years ago? Doesn't it feel like it was 20 years ago? Because that's what I think. And then I realized that's the year I was born. This was before I was born because I'm November of 1988. So suddenly I was alive. Suddenly I was awake. And it feels like it was 20 years ago, but these little lines by my eyes do be showing that it definitely was not 20 years ago. But anyways, July 1988, a girl named Eva contacts the police and tells them a very interesting story. She tells police that the day that Missy went missing, she had been with Missy and Laura. Kind of. Laura had driven over and she had picked up Missy and they had driven off. And Eva was in a car behind Laura's car following them with Karen. Apparently, Eva had been spending a lot of time with Karen specifically, and I guess Laura too, but mostly Karen, in the days leading up to the murder. So she was privy to her mindset and also Laura's mindset around this time. And she knew that these two girls were pissed off at Missy. They felt like she was legitimately ruining their love lives, and they were going to get her this day to confront her about it. Now, Eva tells police that they did go to the park that day, but that they ended up leaving. But not before Laura and Karen got out of their cars and started having a screaming match with each other in front of Missy. Now, why they did this, I can't say for sure, but I think it is probably so that when they were done fighting and Laura starts following Karen as they both drive erratically with Laura chasing her, Missy wouldn't suspect that they were driving her somewhere so that something terrible could happen to her. She would just think Laura was all caught up with being pissed and was chasing Karen for that reason. But the point is they leave with Laura chasing behind Karen's car for quite some time. They drove for just under an hour, like 45 minutes, until they got to a wooded area outside of town, the place where Missy's body would eventually be found. Now, why didn't Eva come forward earlier? I can't say for sure, but what she said is that she was scared. She was scared about getting in trouble for her involvement because she was there that day, but she was also scared what Karen and Laura may do to her if she was to betray them. She said that they had threatened her into silence, and at this point, she knew what they were capable of. She said she had a really hard time dealing with the fact that she knew this information, but she was also scared. She was scared that one day they would just decide that she was a liability and come after her too. But she did come forward, and what caused her to finally come forward was actually the death of her brother. I guess her brother was 18 years old, and he tragically took his own life, which is just horrific. I honestly can't even imagine dealing with that. It's so incredibly sad. And she said that after she lost her brother and she felt what that pain was like, she started to think about how Missy's family must feel and how incredibly real that pain would be. And in their situation, they don't even know what happened to her, who did this to her. Apparently, though, some people wonder if she came forward to get a deal because of the fact that they say that Eva also didn't like Missy because she had heard rumors about Missy and her boyfriend too. So maybe she was a willing participant that didn't participate. She went because she was pissed but didn't do anything. I don't know. This is just what some people say because this is one of those cases that people just talk about a lot. But anyways, Eva tells the police that Karen and Laura had lured Missy to the woods that day so that they could confront her about flirting with their boyfriends, about being with their boyfriends, about being a temptress to the boyfriends, okay? And she says that once they got there, the two girls showed that they weren't really fighting, that they weren't really mad, and that they weren't physical at first. They just forced Missy from the car and then led her down a path into the woods while Eva stayed in the car. Now, Missy was small. Remember, she was under 5 feet tall. Both of these girls were much bigger than her, and there were also two of them. So there really wasn't anything she could do. Now, even though Eva had initially sat in the car, eventually she got out of the car and headed down the path to see what was going on. So she didn't participate, but she was able to witness what happened next. She said that the girls were walking for a while when eventually they stopped and Missy sat on a boulder. And it was at this point that Karen and Laura just started to scream at her and accuse her of supposedly flirting with their boyfriends. And she repeatedly denied it. She's like, I didn't do that. I wouldn't do that. The rumors you're talking about are the rumors that were started against me last last year, which she didn't even know that it was Karen who had started those rumors in the first place about her. So she's denying it over and over, and the girls aren't having it. And at this point, they attack her physically. And Karen said of this time, of this moment, and I quote, "I was tired, I was frustrated, all this stuff, everything we were accusing her of. She knew she did it, but not one time did she say she's sorry." And this is a sentiment that she held on to for years, dude. Even after she was released from prison, she said that she was hurt and she was angry that she never got an apology. This is a woman, a grown adult, who murdered an innocent teenage girl and still thinks she is owed an apology. And that is in her, and she's just out and about. But back to that day in the woods. They punched her in the face, they knocked her on the ground, and they started to pummel her, even ripping an earring out of her ear, before finally they pulled out a knife. I believe it was Laura who took out this knife, and they started cutting off and ripping out chunks of her hair, all while she cried and screamed and asked why they were doing this. And Irene said of their decision to ruin Missy's hair, quote, "They did that to make her look ugly. That was their way of torturing her." Shortly after this, the girls bound Missy's hands behind her back before leading her towards this creek. And Laura actually got into the creek and sort of started to taunt Missy to get in with her, but she did not want to, which I don't blame her. She had to have been so fucking scared at this point. It was at this point that Eva decided she was going to leave. She had seen enough. She didn't want to be part of this. So she left and she went back to the car. And she realized that it was locked. So she turned around and she started to go back up the path to where the girls were. But she heard a terrible scream. And after she heard that scream, she was like, I don't want to know what caused that. So she headed back to the cars and just laid on the ground waiting for her friends to come back. Now, what happened next is, they both kind of tell different stories, but what police were able to piece together based on evidence and what they said is that the three girls were at the stream. Laura was in the water, and Karen and Missy were standing together near the water. And Laura is trying to taunt Missy to get in, and Missy is not having it. So Karen pushes Missy over, and because her hands are still bound, she slams into the ground and she rolls to the edge of the water. And from there, both Laura and Karen force her in the water and start forcing her head underwater. Now, Karen says at this point, she helped Laura pick up a big log before leaving. And she says that she left because she couldn't see what was going to happen next. But she knew she was leaving Laura alone with Missy and that Laura planned to kill her. Okay? This is what later Karen's going to say. But we'll get to that shortly because we're not to Karen and her confession yet. Right now we're talking about Eva. Eva didn't see what happened there. Eva is back at the car and she's laying there when finally her friends return. They're laughing and they're soaking wet. And Missy is not with them. And when she finally gets a chance to speak to them and ask them what happened, they tell her that they killed Missy. So Eva's telling police the story, and they do believe her because she seems to have information about the case that wasn't released to the media, notably the fact that Missy's hair had been cut off at the time she was killed. This is something that I guess people didn't know for a long time. So when hearing the story, they're like, first off, wow, we never would have thought that. That wasn't even on our minds. And two, we should probably look into these two girls because it seems like what this girl is saying is legit. So the police contact both Karen and Laura individually, and they tell them that they want to speak to them about Missy's case. And Karen, she's all for it. She's been very, again, involved. So she's super positive. She's like, hell yeah, I will come and tell you whatever you want to know. Super helpful. Laura is less upbeat, less positive about the situation, rightfully so, because she knows what she did. And again, her life kind of went downhill after she, killed her friend. So she just didn't have this confidence around speaking to police that Karen just seemed to have. And I don't know how she did, but she did. So they show up individually and they're both put in the same waiting room. So they see each other and they realize oh, we are both here to be questioned. That doesn't seem particularly good considering we know what we did together. I feel like that had to raise their anxiety a little bit and lower the confidence that Karen had been feeling prior to this. Or at least had been seemingly feeling prior to this. So both girls are taken to separate interview rooms where they are sat there. They have been sat at these tables, right? Waiting for police to come speak to them. And they're left to sit there and sweat a while, just sitting there having no idea what's going on. And when the police finally did come in to start talking to each of the girls, they let the girls think that the reason it took so long is that they were talking to the other girl. So they go into Karen and they're like, oh, sorry, it took so long. We were talking to Laura for the last hour. And sorry, Laura, that it took so long. We were talking to Karen for the last hour. When really, they weren't talking to anyone. So they start with Karen and they sit down with Karen. They're like, hey, Karen, so here's the thing. We've been talking to Laura all this time and she has confessed to us what she did. We know what you did. Laura told us actually that you were the one who planned this whole thing out. You were the mastermind. You're the person who physically actually murdered Missy. And initially she's sitting there not really saying much, but after some prodding, she's like, okay, here's the thing. Yes, I was there. Yes, I saw what happened, but I didn't do it. Laura was the mastermind. Laura's the one who killed Missy. And I actually ended up just standing by and watching and then leaving when I couldn't handle it anymore. And we know this couldn't be true because of the fact, you remember that log, it was 100 pounds. It would have taken both of these girls to lift and put on top of Missy. But she sweared that she was not responsible for Missy being killed. She said, was she mad at Missy? Yes. Was Missy as innocent as everybody said she was? No. And she said that though she was pretty pissed off when Missy moved in on her territory, Randy, and she was super mad, she could never have killed her. That was her best friend. She couldn't do that to her. Now, when cops sat down with Laura, they did much of the same thing. They told her that Karen had been talking all this time. And despite their best efforts, Laura kept her mouth shut. Even when they told her, like, hey, Karen said that you did everything. Karen said you were the mastermind. Karen said you're the one who drowned Missy. She just sat there and said nothing. But finally, when police were like, okay, we're going to have to go, and we're going to have to go with Karen's version of events since you're not talking and it doesn't look good for you, she finally spoke up and she said, okay, yes, I did take part in this, but Karen forced me. She said that they had gone out there that day because they felt like Missy needed to learn a lesson, but she says that they never intended to kill her. That wasn't on their mind at all. They just wanted to fight her and scare her. She said it was Karen who cut Missy's hair, and it was Karen who started pushing Missy's face under the water, but said it was both of them who lifted that log and put it on her back. So with that, both girls were arrested, and this came as quite a shock, especially to Karen. I'm sure Laura kind of felt like that was coming, but for Karen, she was shocked because she had really gone in there that day thinking she was going to be able to go home, like she was going to be able to get away with this, but nope, straight to jail. After arresting these two girls, the police had to do the impossible task of informing Irene, Missy's mother, that an arrest had been made. Not one arrest, but two arrests, and that the girls that were arrested for this murder were people that she had had in her home, people she had welcomed into her life and treated as her own kids, especially where Karen was concerned. When they told Irene who was responsible, they couldn't even get the entire bit of information out of their mouths before she collapsed onto the floor, which I do not blame her. Can you even imagine being in this situation, to be this woman and have this, I'm going to call it how I sees it, this standing next to you while you bury your kid, to have her in your home, to have her cry with you and to have you support her during her grief and have her support you during your grief, and then find out she's the one who literally killed your kid? She said that Karen made fools out of her and her entire family. She said it felt like somebody punched her in the gut. She could not believe this was possible, that she, Karen, could do something like this to her and to her daughter after everything they'd been through together. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, "I was her mother. Why didn't I know? Why couldn't I tell? Why couldn't I feel? Why couldn't I feel that she'd killed my daughter?" She just said that she couldn't believe this girl that she trusted so much, that she brought into her home and treated like a member of her own family, could, one, kill Missy at all. Like, the fact that she could do that is insane. And then two, let her suffer as long as she did. I mean, she was there seeing what Irene was going through, and she was also trying to misdirect the investigation. I mean, that blue Camaro story alone that they were like pushing, and, you know, the narrative in the first place that these girls had planned together, sent police and Irene herself on a wild goose chase for so long. She said that she would often go out and look for these blue Camaros. She'd be driving around, she'd flag them down, and she'd get them out of their cars, and she would question them. And often Karen was right there by her side watching her do this. And she said because of this ultimate betrayal, Irene said, like, she has such a problem trusting anybody now. And I do not blame her at all. So anyways, both Laura and Karen were arrested, and they were charged with murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and aiding in the commission of a felony after the fact. Karen was held without bail, and Laura was given a $1 million bail, but she was never able to pay it. So she waited in jail for trial to begin because both girls were pleading not guilty. Okay, they said that they never meant for Missy to die. That was not their plan. They had just gone out there to fight her and confront her and torment her because they were jealous of her for talking to their boyfriends. And I mean, is that true? Did they just mean to fight her and things went too far? I can't say for sure. But what I can say for sure is that they were definitely jealous. And the prosecution even said of this during the trial, quote, when referencing Missy, he said, her only problem, at least on that fateful day, was that she was very popular with the boys, and this drove Laura Doyle and Karen Severson crazy. Now, I don't know much about Laura's family, Laura's parents, and their reaction to their daughter being arrested for this murder. There really isn't as much information out there on Laura and what she was doing during this time and what the people who knew her, how they felt when she was arrested. I think she got less coverage because she didn't have the audacity to move in with Missy's family. You know what I mean? Like, obviously people are talking about Karen because that's the most ridiculous and intense and sensational thing I've ever heard in my life. But I know when it came to Karen, because there was more coverage on her, Karen's mother believed that her daughter was innocent. She said that she wouldn't be her mother. She wouldn't be a good mother to her daughter. She didn't believe that. And said that like Missy's parents loved her, but she also loves her daughter. She also loves Karen. And no matter how this trial plays out, there has been a ton of loss here. Now, initially, police were toying with the idea of trying the girls as adults, especially because after they were arrested, there were these two inmates who came forward and said that while they were in jail together, Karen had confessed to them that she was responsible for Missy being killed. But ultimately, the courts did decide, or at least, who makes that decision? The prosecution? No. Ultimately, it was decided by whoever does the deciding that they would be tried as minors since they were underage at the time that they committed the murder. Though I thought I read that Laura was 18, but she must not have been because then I believe, she would have been tried as an adult, but they were going to be tried as minors. But either way, even if they were minors at the time they committed the murder, by the time they went to trial in 1990, they were 22 years old. And strangely, they were having a joint trial. Now, the girls didn't really have much of a leg to stand on since they did admit to what they did, even though they just tried to implicate the other person and then had a joint trial. It's crazy. But in addition to the fact that they admitted what they did, Eva also testified at the trial against them, right? Eva was never charged with anything herself, which is something that the defense had an issue with. So the defense's defense here was that the death was not intentional. And in trying to prove that it wasn't intentional, they tried to discredit Eva and her story as a whole, basically saying that it was crazy that Eva had not been charged with anything because she was there at the time of the murder. In addition to that, she too had issues with Missy. According to the defense, Missy and Eva had even gotten into a fight weeks prior to her murder because Eva, just like Karen and Laura, very important people, they're not, just like Karen and Laura, Eva had thought Missy was messing with her boyfriend too, is basically what the defense is saying. I hope that sentence came out right. It didn't feel like it did, but I did my best, and that's all one can do. They also noted that in Eva's own testimony, she said that she had left the area of the murder before the murder took place. So that meant she couldn't really be a witness as to whether or not this was intentional because she hadn't been there to see the murder. Nobody had seen it, so nobody knows if they meant to commit the murder or not. So once all of the evidence was presented to the jury, they were sent to deliberate. And when they came back with their decision, they had found both Laura and Karen guilty of the second-degree murder of Missy Avila. Yeah, second degree. The prosecution had been going after a first-degree murder conviction, but the jury was not able to come to a unanimous decision that they believed that these girls did this intentionally. And I mean, the defense did point out that if Laura and Karen had meant to kill Missy, if that was their plan that day, and their plan wasn't just to go out there and scare her like they said it was, that it didn't make a lot of sense for them to bring Eva in the first place, which does make sense. The only way that would make sense is if Eva was in on it, but neither of the girls even said Eva was in on it, so it doesn't really make sense that they would bring Eva if they planned that day to kill Missy. However, you don't have to plan it super far in advance for deliberation to be something that's considered, right? Like when you're there and you're fighting and you decide to then push her head underwater, that's a choice that you've made. And when you decide to stop and go and get a 100-pound log to then put on top of her to hold her underwater, that also takes thought and deliberation. So I think they probably could have gotten a first-degree conviction, and I really don't understand why they didn't. And the prosecution clearly agreed and thought they deserved a first-degree murder conviction because they said of it, quote, Our position was that this crime was a deliberate, well-planned torture and execution of Missy and needed to be treated as such. During their sentencing phase, these two girls sat completely emotionless, like they didn't seem sad, they didn't seem upset. They just sat with straight faces while they listened to Missy's family give their victim impact statements, a family who clearly did not agree with the second-degree murder conviction decision. And Missy's mother told the court in part, quote, "I know in my heart that from the moment Laura Doyle picked up my daughter Missy from my home, that Karen and Laura had already planned her murder." She added, quote, "I always wondered what she must have gone through, how very scared and shocked she must have been, and if she called to me." That part actually makes me want to cry. After an hour-long sentencing hearing, both girls were sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. And they did have the possibility of parole. They would be eligible for parole in just 7 years because of the time that they had already served in jail during this time. And again, when their sentences were read, they didn't show any emotion. This decision was devastating. This sentence was devastating. Missy's family, Missy's mother had begged the court to give these girls the longest sentence possible because her whole life had been shattered by them. She said, these girls left my daughter alone to die in the woods like an animal. And Missy's brother said, not only did Laura and Karen murder Missy, but they killed a part of her entire family as well. But the defense was asking for leniency due to the girls' ages at the time that the murder was committed, and said that these girls want a chance to someday be able to rebuild their lives, and said though the Almighty God himself could not heal Missy's family from their pain, people needed to learn to forgive. To which I say, no. And the prosecution disagreed. They were like, listen, these girls sat through this trial, said nothing. Their families also said nothing. They showed no remorse. They didn't seem to feel bad at all, and they don't seem to realize the seriousness of the crime they committed. And, giving them just 15 years to life might not have been the move to make sure that they understood it properly. Just a thought. You let me know what you think, though, if you think that's enough time. I don't, but you let me know down below. Missy's mother, Irene, planned to move away from the area that she lived, her neighborhood where she had lived for Missy's entire life, I believe. She wanted to move away from there to get away from it all, especially considering Karen lived a few houses down. Well, she didn't live there now. She lived in jail. Prison. She lived in prison. But Karen's parents lived there. Laura's parents lived right around the corner, like a block away. And there were just too many memories that she couldn't escape from. And she didn't want to run into these people. So she wanted to leave to get just as far away from the situation as possible, even though she wasn't able to get closure. There's no actually getting over something like this. She said there's never getting over losing your child. And she said specifically of this, quote, "I can't sleep. I can't think. I can't eat. It's been 26 years. It feels like yesterday. Not one day, not 1 minute, not 1 second do I not think about Missy. People say it's been 10 years, 20 years. I don't care if it's 50 years. I'll never get over my daughter." And even if she had had it in her to try to heal and try to move on, she wasn't able to because she would continuously get kicked while she was down and have to keep fighting for her child. For example, she'd have to fight for Missy whenever Karen or Laura would come up for parole, and she'd have to go for these hearings, which were incredibly taxing for her. They were taxing on her mental health and her physical health. After one of these hearings, she literally had a heart attack, and the doctor told her she needed to stop going. And eventually, she would stop going. She'd have to, because both of her daughter's murderers would be released. First came Karen. She served just over 20 years of her sentence and missed her child's entire childhood before finally being released in December of 2011 when she was 45 years old. Irene, Missy's mother, said of Karen's release, quote, "I wish that girl would die. I feel bad for my sons. I feel bad for everybody who knew her. This was a terrible injustice, a terrible injustice. I don't understand why people who commit murder, they let them out." Next was Laura. Laura was released in December of 2012 at the age of 45 after serving 22 years in prison. And when Laura was released, Irene said of her, quote, "I hate her. I hate her. She did nothing but damage my life. Both should have suffered the death penalty. They are free. My daughter is in the ground." Which is true. She really couldn't believe that these people got to just walk free in the world when her daughter was never going to be able to do anything again because they murdered her. but they were free and they handled their freedom very differently. Laura, I have no idea what's going on with her because she just kind of went into the world and disappeared and didn't make a lot of noise, which is like, thank you for that. Karen took the opposite approach. Karen really just made a splash with her freedom. She had more kids, something Missy never even got the opportunity to decide if she wanted to do. And she's a published author. Okay, she wrote two books telling the story of Missy's murder, the murder she committed. And she was even going to try to create either a movie or a documentary, though I don't think that ended up happening. And because she is a public author who went through what she went through, she actually tours the US speaking at schools to talk about anti-bullying. It's just crazy. The anti-bullying thing is kind of blows my mind, what schools are actually letting this woman there, but also writing two books to profit off of the murder that you committed is crazy. But don't worry. She did say that she was going to donate some of the proceeds from the books that she wrote to anti-bullying campaigns or whatever. Some, not all, never all of the money. Some of that money's got to go to her. And she was asked why she doesn't donate all the proceeds of these books to these organizations. And she said, quote, "I didn't say everything. I have to live. It's hard to get a job out there." And the interviewer was like, well, what would you say to people who say that there are other ways that you could make money that aren't profiting from the murder you committed? She responded with, quote, "Like what? Sell myself?" This girl's got a bad attitude. Excuse me, this woman, because she's 45 plus at this point. She was asked, as a mother, you, Karen, are a mother, how would you feel if your child was murdered and then the person who murdered them went on to write a book about what happened? How would you feel? And she said for her, it depended on what the book said. And she just really didn't seem to see anything wrong with writing this book about what happened to Missy because Missy was her friend. Yeah, dude, Missy was her friend. And she said of this is going to blow your mind. She said of it, quote, "That was my friend too. People don't seem to realize that. They don't have a daughter. They don't have a sister. I don't have a friend." Which that's very mind-blowing to me, but she literally said that with her mouth. That came out. I heard it and I was like, halt. Okay. Now, the idea that Karen could profit off of the murder of Missy really pissed her family off. Irene said that this woman kept damaging her family over and over again, and they were going to do everything in their power to make sure that she could not do this. They did this in a couple ways. One, they made a lot of noise. They made sure that everyone knew that this woman who had killed her daughter, who had killed Missy, was trying to profit off of this murder. And they made so much noise that initially the publisher who was handling the book, the distributor, made it so that the book sold for $0 so that she could not profit off of it, which had to have pissed Karen off because she took measures. I don't know what measures she took, but she made it so she could make money again. So in response, Missy's family filed a wrongful death suit against Karen. The family also sued the book's distributor for slander, defamation, libel, and infliction of emotional distress, saying that, quote, "A vicious killer was profiting off their murder, and they wanted to make sure that crime wasn't paying in California." And after they were done with that, they went ahead and pushed for a new law. This was going to be Missy's law. Now, there had already been a law like this in place at one point that was no longer in effect, but basically Missy's law intended to help family members of crime victims recoup money from a perpetrator who has profited from a book or movie deal based on their crime. And they were successful in getting Missy's law passed. A law that Irene said should have been in place a long time ago because by not having it in place, it's like rewarding people for committing crime. And Irene had one message for Karen, and that was that she could go to hell because she, Irene, was Karen's worst nightmare. Now, after getting that amazing law passed in memory of her daughter, Irene did pass away in 2020. So if you believe in an afterlife, then Missy and her mother have been reunited again at this point. But even with Missy not with her for all the years that she had left, she said that she was always with her in spirit because she never let herself or anybody else forget about her. And I want to end this video with a quote from this amazing woman herself, Irene, that I think sums up this case pretty perfectly. She said, and I quote, "All I can say is, girls, watch out whom you trust." And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of Missy Avila. I hope you found it to be informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Missy with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Who do you think was the one who physically murdered Missy? Do you think it was Lauren, or do you think it was Karen, or do you think they did take an equal part in the murder? Let me know. Also, do you think they were given enough time? I wasn't even going to ask about that, but it just makes me crazy. But let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on the list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And if you don't know, now you know. This that you're experiencing is also a podcast. So if you search True Crime with BRATTERSTEIN, I will be there. And I would appreciate it so much if you could go and listen and follow or whatever it is that you do with podcasts. Just interact to help it get out into the algorithm because I am still new. But even if you don't, I just want to thank you for being here. And now with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. I hope to see you in my next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself.